The dust kicked up around the stalled wagon like a copper-colored ghost, and Franklin Sawyer would have ridden right past it if he had not heard the woman's frustrated cry carrying across the empty stretch of Arizona territory between Mineral Point and the Mexican border. It was late summer in 1882, and the heat pressed down on everything like God's own iron, making the air shimmer and dance above the cracked earth. Franklin pulled his horse to a stop, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he recognized the sound as distress rather than danger. 3 years of riding alone through this unforgiving country had taught him to be cautious, but something about that voice pulled at a part of him he thought had died along with his wife and daughter back in the winter of '79. He urged his horse forward, squinting against the glare of the afternoon sun. As he drew closer, he could make out the wagon more clearly now. It was a sturdy freight wagon, the kind settlers used when they meant business about making a new life somewhere. The rear wheel had collapsed at an angle that made Franklin wince. That was not just a loose spoke or a cracked rim. The whole axle assembly looked compromised, and fixing it out here in the middle of nowhere would take time and skill. The woman came around the side of the wagon, and Franklin felt something shift in his chest. She was tall for a woman, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that had started to come loose in the heat. Her dress was dusty and travel-worn, a faded blue calico that had seen better days. She could not have been more than 25, and her face held a determination that reminded him painfully of Sarah before the fever took her. When she saw him, her hand went to her own weapon, a small pistol tucked into her belt, and Franklin raised both hands slowly. "Easy there," he called out. "I heard you from the road. Looks like you could use some help with that wheel." The woman did not lower her guard, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I can manage on my own," she said, though the frustration in her voice suggested otherwise. "I've got tools and spare parts. I just need to figure out the best way to jack it up without the whole thing tipping over." Franklin dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Name is Franklin Sawyer. I have been working with wagons since I was tall enough to hold a wrench. That axle is not just going to need a jack. You are going to need someone to hold the weight while you work, and that is not a one-person job." She studied him for a long moment, her hazel eyes taking in every detail. Franklin knew what she saw. A man in his early 30s, weathered by sun and grief, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that had gone too long between trims. His clothes were dusty but well-maintained, and his horse was well-fed and cared for. These were the signs a smart woman looked for when deciding whether to trust a stranger in the territory. "Amelia Jefferson," she finally said, not offering her hand but giving him a slight nod. "I am heading to Mineral Point to open a bakery. My brother is supposed to be there already, getting the building ready. I was making good time until this happened." Franklin walked around the wagon, assessing the damage. "Your brother let you make this trip alone." "My brother does not let me do anything," Amelia said sharply. "I am a grown woman who makes her own choices. He went ahead because he is better with carpentry than I am. I am better with managing supplies and dealing with merchants. We each play to our strengths." There was a story there, Franklin could tell. A woman traveling alone through the territory in a freight wagon was unusual but not unheard of. The fact that she carried herself with such confidence suggested she had good reason to believe in her own capabilities. He respected that, even as he worried about what could have happened if he had not come along. "Well, Miss Jefferson, I am going to need you to unload some of this cargo from the back," Franklin said, getting down on his knees to examine the broken wheel more closely. "The lighter we can make this corner, the easier it will be to lift. You have got a good spare wheel here, but this axle took some damage. Do you have any spare wood for repairs?" Amelia was already moving toward the back of the wagon. "I've got lumber. I am opening a bakery, remember. I need shelving and counters. I brought enough wood to build half of Mineral Point if I needed to." Over the next hour, they worked in a rhythm that surprised them both. Amelia proved to be as capable as she claimed, hauling heavy flour sacks and crates of supplies without complaint. Franklin found himself talking more than he had in months, explaining what he was doing as he worked and why. There was something about her straightforward manner that made conversation feel natural rather than forced. "So what brings a lone cowboy to this stretch of nothing?" Amelia asked as she handed him a hammer from her toolbox. "You do not strike me as a drifter." Franklin paused, the hammer heavy in his hand. "I work at the Triple S Ranch about 15 miles north of Mineral Point. Been there about a year now. Good work, decent pay, and the foreman does not ask too many questions about a man's past." "Everyone in the territory is running from something," Amelia said. "It was not a question, just a statement of fact." "Or running to something," Franklin replied. "Maybe both." He did not elaborate, and Amelia did not push. Instead, she watched as he carefully lifted the wagon using a combination of leverage and a sturdy jack, then set about removing the damaged wheel. The work was hot and tedious, and sweat soaked through Franklin's shirt within minutes. Amelia brought him water from her canteen without being asked, and he drank gratefully. "This is going to take longer than I thought," Franklin admitted after examining the axle more carefully. "The wood has splintered pretty badly. I am going to need to reinforce it with some of your lumber, and that means measuring, cutting, and fitting. We are looking at another 2 or 3 hours of work, and the sun is already starting to sink." Amelia shaded her eyes and looked at the horizon. "How far is Mineral Point from here?" "About 8 miles, Franklin said. "You would not make it before dark even if we finished in the next hour, and traveling these roads at night is not wise. There are plenty of good people in these parts, but there are also raiders and opportunists who would not think twice about taking advantage of a woman alone. I suppose you are suggesting I make camp here for the night." Amelia's tone was guarded but not hostile. Franklin stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I am suggesting I fix this wheel properly so it does not break again 5 miles down the road, and then I will escort you to Mineral Point in the morning. I can make camp over by those rocks, give you privacy. But I am not going to leave you out here alone with a half-fixed wagon and night coming on." Amelia was quiet for a moment, weighing her options. Franklin could see the conflict on her face. She clearly valued her independence, but she was also practical enough to recognize good advice when she heard it. "All right," she finally said. "But I cook my own dinner, and you keep your camp separate from mine. No offense, Mr. Sawyer, but I do not know you well enough to share a fire." "None taken," Franklin said, and he meant it. "You are being smart. I will get back to work on this wheel." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple that made Franklin's chest ache with memories of Sarah, he worked steadily on the repairs. Amelia busied herself setting up a small camp near the wagon, and Franklin could smell coffee brewing and something else, something sweet and yeasty that made his stomach remind him he had not eaten since early morning. "I am making biscuits," Amelia called out. "I've got extra if you want some." "Consider it payment for your help." Franklin looked up from his work, surprised. "That is not necessary. I am happy to help." "I know it is not necessary," Amelia said, "but I do not like being in anyone's debt, and you are saving me a considerable amount of trouble. The least I can do is feed you." By the time Franklin had the new wheel mounted and the axle properly reinforced, The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He tested the repair carefully, putting his full weight on it and checking for any give or weakness. Satisfied, he walked over to where Amelia had set up her camp. She handed him a tin plate with 4 golden biscuits, still warm from her portable oven. Franklin took one bite and felt something break open inside him. They were perfect, light and flaky with a subtle sweetness that reminded him of his grandmother's baking when he was a boy. "These are incredible," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. Amelia smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "My specialty. Wait until you try my cinnamon rolls. They are what is going to make my bakery successful in Mineral Point." They ate in companionable silence for a while, with Franklin sitting at a respectful distance and Amelia perched on the wagon steps. The desert night was cooling quickly, and Franklin could hear coyotes calling in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said after a while. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Franklin nodded, bracing himself. "When I first saw you, you had this look on your face. Like you were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that hurt. I have seen that look before on my father after my mother died. Are you carrying that kind of grief?" Franklin set down his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. He could have deflected, could have changed the subject or made a joke. But something about the gathering darkness and Amelia's honest question made him want to answer truthfully. "My wife Sarah and my daughter Emma," he said quietly. "Fever took them both in the winter of '79, up in Colorado. Emma was 3 years old. I could not save either of them, could not do anything but watch them slip away. After that, I could not stay in the house we had built together, could not stay in the town where everyone looked at me with pity, so I started riding, and I have been riding ever since." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry," she said finally. "That is a terrible burden to carry." "What about you?" Franklin asked. "What are you running from or running to?" Amelia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a baker in Philadelphia, taught me everything I know. After he passed, my stepmother made it clear that she expected me to marry her nephew and let him take over the bakery. He was a cruel man who drank too much and thought women were property. So my brother and I took our inheritance and headed west. We figured we could make a fresh start somewhere people did not have expectations about who we should be." "That took courage," Franklin said. "Or desperation," Amelia replied with a small laugh. "Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." They talked for another hour, their voices quiet in the vast darkness of the desert night. Franklin found himself sharing stories he had not told anyone in years, about Sarah and the life they had planned together, about Emma's laugh and the way she had loved horses even as a toddler. Amelia told him about her father's bakery, about the early mornings spent mixing dough and the satisfaction of pulling perfect loaves from the oven, about her brother Thomas and his dreams of building furniture as fine as anything back east. Eventually, Amelia yawned and stood. "I should get some sleep. We have got an early start ahead of us if we are going to make Mineral Point by midday." Franklin stood as well, gathering his plate. "Thank you for the biscuits, and for listening. I have not talked about Sarah and Emma in a long time. Sometimes talking about the people we have lost is the only way to keep them alive," Amelia said softly. "Good night, Mr. Sawyer." "Franklin," he said. "You can call me Franklin." "Good night, Franklin, and thank you for stopping to help. I probably could have managed eventually, but I am glad I did not have to." Franklin made his camp by the rocks as promised, spreading his bedroll and staring up at the stars. For the first time in 3 years, he did not feel quite so alone with his grief. Something about Amelia Jefferson, about her straightforward manner and her obvious strength, had gotten past the walls he had built around his heart. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, and he was not sure what to do with the feeling. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the desert coming alive in shades of gold and amber. Franklin woke before Amelia and checked the wagon wheel one more time, making sure everything was secure. He heard her stirring as he was finishing up, and when she emerged from her makeshift tent looking rumpled but determined, he felt that same shift in his chest that he had experienced yesterday. "Good morning," she called out. "I have got coffee on if you want some." They shared a simple breakfast of coffee and more of Amelia's biscuits, along with some dried meat from Franklin's supplies. Then they hitched up her team, and Franklin tied his horse to the back of the wagon. Amelia looked at him questioningly. "Figured I would ride with you," he explained. "Keep you company on the way into town. If you do not mind, that is." "I do not mind," Amelia said, and there was something in her voice that made Franklin's heart beat faster. The road to Mineral Point was rough but manageable, and the repaired wheel held up beautifully. They talked as they traveled, the conversation flowing easily between them. Amelia told him about her plans for the bakery, about the special recipes she had brought from her father's shop, about her hopes of making enough money to eventually buy a proper house, instead of living in the rooms above the store. Franklin told her about the Triple S Ranch, about the work of managing cattle in the harsh Arizona climate, about the satisfaction of honest labor and the camaraderie of the other ranch hands. He found himself painting a picture of a life that had started to feel like more than just survival, though he had not realized it until now. "You think you will stay at the ranch?" Amelia asked. "Or is this just another stop before you move on?" Franklin considered the question carefully. "I have been asking myself that same thing. I thought I would never want to settle anywhere again after losing Sarah and Emma. Thought staying in one place would just mean collecting more things to lose. But lately, I have been wondering if there is a difference between running from grief and running toward something new." "I think there can be," Amelia said quietly. "I think sometimes we need to run before we can stand still again." Mineral Point appeared on the horizon just before noon, a cluster of buildings that seemed to rise out of the desert like a mirage. The town was small but growing, with new construction visible on several streets. Franklin had been here a few times for supplies, and he knew the basics. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a bank, and a few other businesses. There was a church on the edge of town and a small school that served the surrounding ranches and homesteads. "There is Thomas," Amelia exclaimed, pointing to a tall man standing outside a building with fresh lumber stacked nearby. She urged the horses faster, and Franklin could see her excitement building. Thomas Jefferson was a lanky man in his late 20s with the same dark hair as his sister but lighter eyes. He broke into a huge grin when he saw the wagon approaching and came running to meet them. "Amelia, thank God. I was starting to worry when you did not arrive yesterday." He pulled her into a fierce hug as soon as she climbed down from the wagon, then looked at Franklin with curiosity and a touch of suspicion. "Who is this?" "This is Franklin Sawyer," Amelia said. "He helped me fix a broken wheel about 8 miles out. The axle splintered, and I would probably still be sitting out there trying to figure it out if he had not come along. Franklin, this is my brother Thomas." Franklin shook Thomas's hand, noting the firm grip and the assessing look in the younger man's eyes. "Pleased to meet you. Your sister handled the situation better than most people would have. She had all the right supplies and knew what needed to be done. She just needed an extra pair of hands." Thomas relaxed slightly at Franklin's respectful tone. "That sounds like Amelia. She has always been the practical one in the family." He turned to his sister. "Wait until you see the building. I've got the ovens installed and they are beauties. The man who sold them to me said they came all the way from San Francisco. Over the next few hours, Franklin helped unload the wagon, carrying heavy sacks of flour and crates of baking supplies into the new bakery. The building was small but well constructed, with large windows that would let in plenty of light and enough space for a good-sized workspace and a small shop front. Thomas had been busy. The shelves were already built and sanded smooth, and the ovens looked brand new. "This is wonderful, Thomas," Amelia said, her eyes shining as she looked around. "You have done such good work." "I had help from some of the locals," Thomas admitted. "Everyone is excited about having a real bakery. The hotel does bread, but it is nothing special. When I told people my sister trained under our father in Philadelphia, they could not wait to meet you. Franklin should have left then. He had done what he set out to do, had seen Amelia safely to town. But he found himself lingering, helping arrange the heavy equipment, offering suggestions about the layout based on what he remembered of the bakery in the Colorado town, where he had lived with Sarah. Amelia listened carefully to his ideas, and more than once their eyes met across the room in a way that made Franklin forget to breathe. "Stay for dinner," Thomas said as the afternoon wore on. "It is the least we can do after you helped my sister. We are staying at the hotel until the rooms above the bakery are finished, and the restaurant there is decent." Franklin knew he should decline. He needed to get back to the ranch, had already been gone longer than he planned. But when he looked at Amelia and saw the hope in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "I would like that," he said. Dinner at the hotel restaurant was a lively affair. Thomas was a natural storyteller, and he kept them entertained with tales of the journey west and the characters he had met in Mineral Point. But Franklin found his attention kept drifting to Amelia, to the way she laughed at her brother's jokes, to the intelligence in her eyes when she discussed her business plans, to the small gesture she made of tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "So Franklin," Thomas said, pulling him back into the conversation, "Amelia tells me you work at the Triple S Ranch. That is one of the bigger operations around here, is it not?" "One of the biggest," Franklin confirmed. "We run about 2,000 head of cattle, and we are always looking to expand. The owner, Mr. Simpson, is a fair man and a smart businessman. He treats his workers well, which is not always the case in this country. And you have been there about a year." Thomas's tone was casual, but Franklin could hear the unspoken question. "Are you planning to stay?" "About that," Franklin said. "I have been moving around since I left Colorado, but the Triple S feels different. Feels like a place I could stay for a while." He looked at Amelia as he said it, and he saw her lips curve into a small smile. After dinner, Franklin walked with Amelia back toward the bakery. Thomas had excused himself, claiming he needed to check on some lumber delivery, but Franklin suspected the younger man was deliberately giving them time alone. "Your brother is protective of you," Franklin observed. "He has reason to be," Amelia said. "We only have each other now. He wants to make sure I am safe and happy." They stopped in front of the bakery, and in the light of the street lamps, Amelia's face was soft and lovely. Franklin wanted to reach out and touch her hand, to tell her that he had not felt this way about anyone since Sarah died, that she had somehow gotten past his defenses without even trying. But it was too soon, too fast. They had only known each other for a day. "I should get back to the ranch," he said instead. "But I would like to come back to town soon, maybe try some of those famous cinnamon rolls you mentioned." Amelia's smile was radiant. "I would like that. I am planning to open in 3 days once I get everything organized. Come by any time. The first cinnamon roll is on the house." "I will hold you to that," Franklin said. He tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Amelia. It was a pleasure meeting you." "The pleasure was mine," Amelia said softly. "Thank you again, Franklin, for everything." The ride back to the Triple S Ranch took longer than usual because Franklin kept stopping, turning around, almost riding back to Mineral Point. He felt like he was leaving something important behind, something he might not find again if he did not hold on to it. But he needed time to think, to figure out what he was feeling and whether it was real or just loneliness talking. The next few days at the ranch passed in a blur. Franklin threw himself into his work, helping with a cattle drive to new grazing land and repairing fences damaged by a recent storm. But his mind kept drifting back to Amelia, to their conversations under the desert stars, to the way she had looked at him across the bakery. His friend and fellow ranch hand, a grizzled older man named Pete, noticed the change. "You have been somewhere else in your head for days now," Pete observed as they worked on a particularly stubborn fence post. "This have anything to do with that trip to town the other day?" Franklin had told the foreman he needed to go to Mineral Point for personal business, which was not entirely untrue. "I met someone," he admitted. "A woman opening a bakery. She needed help with a broken wagon wheel." Pete's weathered face crinkled into a grin. "And you helped her, being the gentleman you are." "She pretty." "She is beautiful," Franklin said, then was surprised by his own honesty. "But it is more than that. She is strong and smart and funny. She has this way of looking at the world that makes me remember there is more to life than just existing day to day." "Then what are you doing out here talking to an old man?" Pete demanded. "Get yourself cleaned up and go back to town." "Life is too short to waste time when you meet someone special, Franklin. Trust me on that. I learned it the hard way." Franklin knew Pete was right. That evening he asked the foreman for a day off, promising to make up the work. The foreman, who had a romantic streak under his gruff exterior, agreed immediately. "Take 2 days if you need them," he said. "Just make sure you come back engaged or do not come back at all." He said it with a grin, but Franklin could hear the truth underneath. The men at the ranch had been worried about him, about the way he held himself apart from everyone else. The next morning, Franklin rode into Mineral Point with his heart pounding like a kid on his first courting call. He had cleaned up as best he could, shaved, put on his good shirt. He felt ridiculous and hopeful in equal measure. The bakery was easy to find. A small crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and pastries wafting into the street. Franklin tied up his horse and joined the line, listening to the excited chatter around him. "Best bread I have had since leaving St. Louis," one woman was saying. "Those cinnamon rolls are worth their weight in gold," another added. When Franklin finally made it through the door, he stopped short. Amelia was behind the counter, her face flushed with the heat of the ovens and the excitement of a successful opening. She wore a white apron over her dress and her hair was pinned up neatly. When she saw him, her whole face lit up. "Franklin, you came." "I promised I would try those cinnamon rolls," he said, moving to the side to let other customers place their orders. "Looks like you have been busy." "Busy does not even begin to describe it," Amelia said, laughing. She called to the back room. "Thomas, can you handle the counter for a minute?" Thomas appeared, saw Franklin, and grinned knowingly. "Go ahead. I can manage." Amelia came around the counter and led Franklin to a small table by the window that she had apparently saved for just this purpose. She brought him a cinnamon roll that was still warm from the oven, along with a cup of coffee, and sat down across from him. "So," she said, watching him expectantly. "What do you think?" Franklin took a bite and closed his eyes. The roll was perfect, sweet and buttery with just the right amount of cinnamon. It tasted like home, like comfort, like all the good things he thought he had lost forever. "This is the best thing I have ever tasted," he said honestly. Amelia beamed. "I am so glad. I was hoping you would like it. I have been thinking about you, wondering if you would really come back." "I have been thinking about you too," Franklin admitted. "Could not stop thinking about you if I am being honest. I know we just met, and I know this might sound crazy, but I feel like something changed when I stopped to help you with that wheel. Like maybe I stopped running for the first time in 3 years." Amelia reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and dusted with flour, and Franklin felt something settle into place inside him. "I feel it too," she said quietly. "I was not looking for this. I came out here to build a business, to make a new life for myself. I was not expecting to meet someone who would make me want more than that." They sat there for a long moment, just holding hands and looking at each other. Around them, the bakery bustled with activity, but Franklin felt like they were in their own world. "I want to court you properly," Franklin said. "If you will let me. I want to take you to dinner and ride with you in the evenings and learn everything about you. I know I come with baggage. I know I am still learning how to live with my grief. But I think maybe you are exactly who I need to help me figure out how to do that." "I would like that very much," Amelia said. "But I need you to know something too. I am not looking for someone to take care of me or rescue me. I can take care of myself. What I want is a partner, someone who will stand beside me, not in front of me. Can you be that person?" Franklin thought about Sarah, about how they had built their life together as equals, how he had always valued her opinion and her strength. "Yes," he said firmly. "That is exactly the kind of relationship I want too." Over the next few weeks, Franklin made the trip to Mineral Point as often as he could. Sometimes he had legitimate errands, supplies to pick up or messages to deliver. Other times, he simply told the foreman he was going to town and endured the good-natured ribbing from the other ranch hands. Each visit deepened his connection with Amelia. They went on long rides through the desert in the early evening when the heat had broken and the light turned everything golden. Amelia proved to be an excellent rider, comfortable in the saddle and unafraid of the wide open spaces. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories and their dreams for the future. Franklin told her more about Sarah and Emma, about the guilt he still carried for not being able to save them, about the anger he had felt at God and the world for taking them away. Amelia listened without judgment, holding his hand when the memories became too painful. "Grief does not have a timeline," she told him one evening as they watched the sunset from a high ridge overlooking Mineral Point. "My father used to say that love and loss are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without risking the other, but that does not make the love any less valuable or the loss any less real." "You sound like him," Franklin said, "like someone who has thought deeply about these things." "I watched him grieve for my mother for 15 years, Amelia said. "He loved her until the day he died, but he also learned to live again. He remarried, even though it did not work out the way he hoped. He taught me that being brave enough to love again after loss is one of the most courageous things a person can do." Amelia shared her own fears with him too. She talked about the risk she was taking with the bakery, about the money she and Thomas had invested, and what would happen if they failed. She talked about the loneliness she had felt in Philadelphia after her father died, about the pressure to conform to what was expected of her, about the relief and terror of starting over in a new place. "Some mornings I wake up and I am absolutely certain I have made a terrible mistake," she confessed. "That I am going to fail and lose everything and have to crawl back east with my tail between my legs. And then," Franklin prompted, "and then I go downstairs and I start baking, and I remember why I love this. I remember my father's hands showing me how to knead dough, and I remember the satisfaction of creating something good and nourishing. and I think maybe it will be okay after all." The bakery was thriving. Amelia's reputation spread quickly through the surrounding ranches and homesteads, and soon people were making special trips to Mineral Point just to buy her bread and pastries. Thomas had his own carpentry business starting to take off, with several commissions for custom furniture from the wealthier residents. Franklin found himself becoming part of their little family. He helped Thomas with heavy lifting and construction projects on the weekends. He became a regular at the bakery, often showing up early in the morning to keep Amelia company while she worked. She taught him how to braid dough for challah and how to judge when bread was perfectly proofed. He taught her to read tracks in the desert and how to shoot accurately with her pistol. But it was not all smooth sailing. About 2 months after they met, Franklin had a nightmare. He and Amelia had taken to meeting for early morning coffee before she started her baking, and he showed up at the bakery looking haggard and exhausted. "I dreamed about them last night," he said without preamble. "Emma and Sarah. In the dream, they were alive and I was so happy. But then I realized I was forgetting what they looked like, that their faces were fading. And Sarah looked at me and asked how I could do this, how I could forget them so easily." Amelia set down her coffee cup and came around the table to sit beside him. "You are not forgetting them, Franklin. You are learning to live again. There is a difference." "It feels like betrayal," Franklin said roughly. "Being happy with you feels like I am saying they did not matter, that I do not miss them anymore, but I do miss them, every single day." "Love does not divide," Amelia said firmly. "It multiplies. Loving me does not mean you love them less. Your heart is big enough for all of us. I would never ask you to forget Sarah and Emma. They are part of who you are, part of what made you the man I am falling in love with." Franklin looked at her sharply. "You are falling in love with me?" Amelia blushed but did not look away. "Yes, I am. I probably have been since you offered to make camp separately that first night to make sure I felt safe. I saw who you were then, even if I did not want to admit it. You are kind and honorable and strong, and you are not afraid to be vulnerable. How could I not fall in love with you?" Franklin pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. "I love you too," he said, his voice muffled. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I do not know how to do this again, how to open my heart knowing what it feels like when everything is ripped away." "You do it one day at a time," Amelia said, holding him tight. "You do it by trusting that what we have is worth the risk. You do it by believing that we are strong enough to face whatever comes together." After that morning, something shifted between them. They had both said the words, had both acknowledged what they felt. Now it was just a matter of figuring out what to do about it. Franklin started talking to the foreman at the Triple S Ranch about opportunities for advancement. He had been saving his wages carefully, and he had skills that went beyond basic ranch handwork. When he tentatively mentioned that he might be thinking about settling down, about maybe starting his own small spread someday, the foreman was encouraging. "You are one of the best workers I have got," the foreman said. "Smart, reliable, good with people and animals. If you wanted to stay on here in a management role, I could make that happen. Or if you wanted to strike out on your own, I could point you towards some land that would be perfect for a small operation." Franklin took this information back to Amelia. They were sitting on the porch of the bakery after closing, watching the town settle into evening. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Would you want to stay in Mineral Point if I bought land nearby? Or would you rather move somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunity?" "I want to stay here," Amelia said without hesitation. "Thomas and I have built something real in this town. The bakery is doing well, better than I even hoped, and the people here have been good to us. I cannot imagine starting over again somewhere else." "Good," Franklin said, relief evident in his voice. "Because I have been looking at a piece of land about 3 miles from town. It is not much, just 100 acres with a decent water source, but it is enough to run some cattle and maybe plant a small garden. There is a house on it, needs work, but it is structurally sound. I have been saving money, and I think I can afford it if I am careful." Amelia turned to look at him, her eyes bright. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" Franklin took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am saying I want to build a life here, with you if you will have me. I know we have only known each other a few months, and by most standards that is too fast. But I have learned that life is short and unpredictable, and when you find something good, you should hold on to it." "I agree," Amelia said softly, "but Franklin, I need you to be sure. I need to know that you are doing this because you want a future with me, not because you are trying to recreate what you lost. I cannot be Sarah, and I would not want to try." Franklin pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I do not want you to be Sarah. I want you to be exactly who you are. You are not a replacement for anyone. You are Amelia, and you are the woman I love, and I want to marry you and build a life with you. A new life, not a copy of my old one." "Then yes," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I want to build that life with you." Franklin kissed her then properly for the first time. It was sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and smiling. Thomas, who had been tactfully staying inside the bakery, chose that moment to emerge. He looked at their faces and grinned. "Finally. I was wondering how long it was going to take you two to figure it out. So when is the wedding?" The next few months passed in a flurry of activity. Franklin bought the land he had been eyeing, and with the help of Thomas and some of the ranch hands from the S, he began fixing up the house. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that reminded him of building his first home with Sarah. This time, though, there was no shadow of guilt. This was different, new, its own thing. Amelia was equally busy. The bakery required her attention, but she also helped with the house when she could, offering opinions on layout and decoration. They decided to get married in early December, just before the holiday season, when business at the bakery would slow down enough for Amelia to take a few days off. The wedding was a small affair held in the Mineral Point Church. Thomas stood up for Franklin, and Amelia's friend Margaret, who ran the general store, served as her attendant. Most of the town turned out for the celebration, along with Franklin's friends from the S ranch. Franklin stood at the altar in his best suit, watching Amelia walk down the aisle toward him, and felt his heart overflow. She wore a simple cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Thomas had gathered from the desert that morning. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was real and present and choosing him, just as he was choosing her. The minister, an older man who had been kind to Franklin during his first year in Mineral Point, spoke about love and commitment and the courage it takes to start over. "Marriage is an act of faith," he said. "It is choosing to believe in a future you cannot see, choosing to trust another person with your heart even though hearts are fragile things. Franklin and Amelia, you have both known loss. You understand how precious and fleeting life can be. May that knowledge make your marriage stronger, not weaker. May you treasure each day you have together." When Franklin said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "Amelia, I never thought I would stand here again. After I lost Sarah and Emma, I thought my life was over. I thought I would just drift through whatever years I had left, never really living, just existing. And then you called out in frustration over a broken wagon wheel, and everything changed. You taught me that it is possible to love again without betraying the people I have lost. You showed me that my heart was not broken beyond repair. I promise to honor you, to stand beside you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to remember that you are your own person with your own dreams, and to support those dreams with everything I have. I love you, and I choose you, today and every day forward." Amelia's vows were equally heartfelt. "Franklin, when you stopped to help me that day in the desert, I thought you were just a kind stranger. I had no idea you were the answer to questions I had not even known to ask. You have shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued, not for what I can provide, but for who I am. You have made me believe in the possibility of partnership, of building something together that is stronger than what either of us could create alone. I promise to be your safe harbor, to listen when you need to talk about the family you lost, to make space for your grief even as we build our joy. I promise to challenge you and support you and love you with everything I have. You helped me fix a broken wheel, and somehow in the process, I think we fixed each other." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Franklin kissed Amelia, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Amelia had made their wedding cake herself, a towering creation of vanilla layers with buttercream frosting that had everyone asking for seconds. Franklin danced with his bride, then with Margaret, then with several of the ranch wives who wanted to congratulate him. Later, as they were preparing to leave for their new home, Pete pulled Franklin aside. The old cowboy had tears in his eyes, though he tried to hide them with gruffness. "You did good, son," Pete said, clasping Franklin's shoulder. "Sarah would be happy for you. She would want this for you." Franklin felt tears prick his own eyes. "Thank you, Pete. That means more than you know." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, as any first months would be. They had to learn each other's habits and quirks, had to figure out how to share space and make decisions together. Amelia continued running the bakery, getting up before dawn each morning to start the ovens. Franklin worked the land, building up a small herd of cattle and fixing up the property. But they made it work. Franklin often rode into town with Amelia in the early mornings, helping her set up before heading back to work on the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and talk about their days, about the customers Amelia had served and the work Franklin had accomplished. On Sundays, they would ride out into the desert together, just the two of them and the endless sky. There were hard moments, too. Franklin still had nightmares occasionally, waking in a cold sweat from dreams of Sarah and Emma. Amelia would hold him until the panic passed, never judging, always patient. And there were times when the pressure of running the bakery got to Amelia, when she would come home exhausted and worried about money or supplies or competition from the hotel. During those times, Franklin would make her tea and rub her shoulders and remind her of how far she had come. "You have built something amazing," he would tell her. "You have created a business that brings joy to this whole town. Do not let the hard days make you forget that." As winter turned to spring in 1883, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Franklin one evening over dinner, her voice trembling with a mixture of joy and fear. Franklin's first reaction was panic. The memories of losing Emma and Sarah came rushing back, the helplessness, the terror. But then he looked at Amelia's face, at the hope and worry there, and he forced himself to breathe. "We are going to be parents," he said slowly, testing out the words. "Yes," Amelia said. "Are you okay? I know this must bring up difficult memories." Franklin stood and pulled her into his arms. "It does," he admitted. "I am terrified, but I am also happy, so happy. We are going to do this together, and it is going to be okay." The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia had terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Franklin often found himself running the bakery with Thomas's help while Amelia rested. But she was determined to keep working as long as she could, and by the second trimester, she was back to her usual routine. As her belly grew, Franklin found himself talking to the baby, telling stories about the Triple S Ranch and the desert and all the things they would do together. He talked about Sarah and Emma too, wanting this child to know that there had been others before, that love did not diminish but grew. "Your papa had a daughter before you," he would say, his hand on Amelia's stomach. "Her name was Emma, and she was brave and funny and loved horses. And he had a wife named Sarah who was strong and kind. They are not here anymore, but they are part of our story. Part of what made your papa who he is. And your mama had a father who taught her to bake bread that can make people happy even on their worst days. We come from love, all of us, and that love does not end just because people are gone." Amelia would cry during these talks, moved by Franklin's willingness to include his first family in their new life. "You are going to be such a good father," she would tell him. In September of 1883, after a long labor that had Franklin pacing a hole in the floor, Amelia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him David Thomas Sawyer, after both of their fathers. Franklin held his son for the first time with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the weight of this small life. "Hello, David," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I promise to do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy and loved." The first year of David's life was exhausting and wonderful. Franklin had forgotten how much work babies were, how little sleep new parents got. But he had also forgotten the joy, the wonder of watching a tiny human discover the world. David's first smile, his first laugh, his first attempts to crawl. All of these moments filled Franklin with a fierce protectiveness and love that he had thought lost forever. Amelia proved to be an amazing mother, balancing the demands of the bakery with the needs of their son. They worked out a system where Franklin would bring David to the bakery during the mid-morning lull so Amelia could nurse him, and she would close the shop for 2 hours each afternoon to spend time with the baby. Thomas doted on his nephew, carving beautiful wooden toys and building a cradle that was a work of art. "This boy is going to be spoiled rotten," he declared, but there was so much love in his voice that neither Franklin nor Amelia could object. When David was 6 months old, Franklin took his family to visit Sarah and Emma's graves in Colorado. It was a long trip, but he felt it was important. He needed to introduce his son to the people who had come before, needed to stand at those graves with Amelia by his side, and know that he could hold both his past and his future in his heart. They stood in the small cemetery on a cold spring day, with David bundled in blankets in Amelia's arms. Franklin placed flowers on the graves, his throat tight with emotion. "Sarah, Emma," he said quietly, "I want you to meet my family. This is my wife Amelia and our son David. I have found happiness again, and I need you to know that it does not mean I have forgotten you. It does not mean you did not matter. You will always be part of me, always be the foundation that everything else is built on. But I am learning to live again, and I think you would be happy about that. I think you would like Amelia. She is strong like you were, Sarah. She has that same determination, that same unwillingness to give up. And I think Emma would have loved being a big sister to David. She would have taught him to be brave." Amelia stepped forward and placed her own flowers on the graves. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for loving Franklin, for teaching him what family means, for shaping him into the man I love. Your loss is part of our story, and I promise we will always honor that." They stayed in Colorado for 3 days, long enough for Franklin to visit the house he had built with Sarah, to walk the streets he had walked when his first life was intact. It was painful but also healing. He could finally see his past without drowning in it, could acknowledge what he had lost while still embracing what he had found. On the trip back to Arizona, with David sleeping peacefully in the wagon bed and Amelia dozing against his shoulder, Franklin felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. He was a man who had loved and lost and learned to love again. He was a husband and father, a rancher and friend. He was scarred but whole, broken but mended. The years passed. David grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch and helping his mother in the bakery. When he was 3, Amelia became pregnant again, and this time Franklin's fear was tempered by experience. He knew now that while terrible things could happen, they did not always happen. Sometimes life was kind. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1887. A squalling, red-faced baby girl they named Sarah Rose, after Franklin's first wife and Amelia's mother. It felt right, this acknowledgement of the women who had shaped them. Young David was fascinated by his little sister, insisting on helping with everything and telling anyone who would listen that he was a big brother now. The bakery continued to thrive. Amelia had hired help, 2 young women from town who were learning the trade. This allowed her more time with the children while still maintaining the quality that had made her business successful. Franklin's small ranch had grown too. He now ran 100 head of cattle and had hired a young man to help with the work. They were happy. Not in the way of stories where everything is perfect and nothing ever goes wrong, but in the real, messy way of actual life. They argued sometimes, usually about money or how to handle the children. They had hard days and setbacks and disappointments. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On a warm evening in the fall of 1888, Franklin sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset. David was playing in the yard, building something elaborate with the blocks Thomas had made him. Inside, he could hear Amelia singing to baby Sarah as she put her down for the night. The sound of her voice, sweet and clear, drifted through the open window. Pete rode up, older and more weathered but still working at the Triple S Ranch. He dismounted and sat down on the porch steps with a groan. "Getting too old for this," he complained good-naturedly. "Saw the smoke from your chimney and thought I would stop by." Franklin poured him a cup of coffee from the pot Amelia always kept warm. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching David play and the light fade from the sky. "You have built a good life here," Pete said finally. "I am proud of you, Franklin, proud of how you came back from the grief. Not many men could have done that." "I had help," Franklin said, nodding toward the house where Amelia was emerging with Sarah in her arms. "I could not have done it without her." Amelia came to sit beside him, and Franklin wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Sarah gurgled happily, reaching for her father's beard with chubby fists. David abandoned his blocks and climbed up into Pete's lap, chattering about the horse he wanted for his birthday. "You know," Pete said, bouncing David gently, "I remember when you first showed up at the Triple S. You looked like a ghost, like you were already halfway to the grave. Would not have bet $1 on you making it through that first winter. But look at you now. You have got a beautiful wife, healthy kids, land of your own. You have done more than survive. You have actually lived." "I had a broken wagon wheel to thank for it," Franklin said, squeezing Amelia closer. "If I had ridden past that day, if I had not stopped to help, I do not know where I would be now. Probably still drifting, still running from my past." "Everything happens for a reason," Amelia said. "I needed someone to help me fix that wheel, and you needed someone to help fix your heart. We found each other at exactly the right time." "You make it sound so simple," Franklin said with a smile. "Maybe it is simple," Amelia replied. "Maybe we complicate things by thinking we have to have all the answers before we take a risk. Sometimes you just have to say yes to help when it is offered, and yes to love when it finds you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Franklin thought about the journey that had brought him here. The grief that had nearly destroyed him, the aimless years of running, the chance encounter with a woman who needed help with a broken wheel. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about how loving them had taught him what was possible, even though losing them had nearly broken him. But he had not stayed broken. With Amelia's help, with her patience and strength and unwavering belief in him, he had healed. Not completely. There were still scars, still moments when the old grief rose up, but he had learned to carry it without letting it crush him. He had learned that his heart was bigger than he thought, capable of holding both sorrow and joy, past and present, loss and love. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked softly, as if she could sense the direction of his thoughts. "Everything," Franklin said. "Nothing. How lucky I am. How grateful I am that you called out that day, that I heard you, that I stopped." "I am grateful too," Amelia said. "For the broken wheel, for your kindness, for this life we have built together." Pete eventually took his leave, promising to come back for Sunday dinner. David went to bed protesting, insisting he was not tired even as his eyes drooped. Franklin carried him up to his room, tucking him in and kissing his forehead. "Papa," David said sleepily, "tell me the story about how you met Mama." It was his favorite story, one Franklin had told 100 times. But he never got tired of telling it, of remembering that day and how it had changed everything. "Well," Franklin began, settling onto the edge of the bed. "It was a hot day in the summer of 1882, and I was riding from the Triple S Ranch toward Mineral Point. The desert was quiet except for the wind, and I was just thinking about what supplies I needed to pick up in town. And then I heard a sound, a cry of frustration that carried across the empty land. Your mama was standing by her wagon, and one of the wheels had broken clean off." "And you stopped to help her," David prompted, his eyes drifting closed. "I stopped to help her," Franklin confirmed. "Because that is what decent people do. They help when someone needs it, even if it is not convenient, even if they have somewhere else to be. And it turned out that helping your mama fix her broken wheel was the best decision I ever made. Because in fixing that wheel, she somehow fixed the broken pieces of my heart too." David was asleep before Franklin finished, his breathing deep and even. Franklin sat for a moment longer, watching his son sleep, marveling at the miracle of this life. Then he went back downstairs to where Amelia was waiting. They sat together on the porch, Amelia leaning against Franklin's chest, his arms wrapped around her. Sarah slept in a basket beside them, peaceful and content. The night was cool and clear, with the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past that day?" Amelia asked. Franklin considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I realize it does not matter. I did not ride past. I stopped, and you were there, and everything that has happened since has been because of that choice. I do not believe everything happens for a reason, but I do believe we can choose to make meaning out of what happens to us. I chose to stop, you chose to trust me, we chose each other over and over again. And we keep choosing each other," Amelia said. "Every day, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days." "Especially then," Franklin agreed. They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind rustled through the scrub brush, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance. Franklin thought about the future, about watching David and Sarah grow up, about growing old with Amelia by his side. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. There always were, but he was not afraid anymore. He had learned that life was precious and fragile and worth fighting for. He had learned that love could survive even the darkest times, that the heart could break and mend and break and mend again. Most importantly, he had learned that he was stronger than he thought. Not strong enough to do it alone, but strong enough to accept help when it was offered. Strong enough to open his heart even when it was terrifying. Strong enough to choose life and love and hope even after experiencing the worst kind of loss. "I love you," he said to Amelia, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. "I love you too," she replied, tilting her head up for a kiss. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for helping me with my wheel. Thank you for letting me," Franklin said. "Thank you for seeing past the grief to the man underneath. Thank you for being patient while I figured out how to live again." "We figured it out together," Amelia corrected. "That is what partners do." As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they eventually went inside, banking the fire and checking on the children one last time before climbing into bed. Franklin held Amelia close, breathing in the scent of flour and cinnamon that always clung to her hair, feeling her heartbeat steady and strong against his chest. This was home, he thought as sleep claimed him. Not the house, though he loved the home they had built together. Not the land, though he took pride in what they had accomplished. Home was this, lying beside the woman he loved, with his children sleeping safely down the hall with a future stretching out before them full of possibility. He had been so lost, so broken, when he met Amelia. He had thought his life was over, that he would never feel whole again. But she had proven him wrong, not by erasing his past or replacing what he had lost, but by showing him that there was room in his heart for more. Room for new love alongside the old, room for joy even in the presence of sorrow, room for a future even while honoring the past. The years continued to unfold. David grew tall and strong, showing an early aptitude for working with animals. By the time he was 10, he was helping Franklin with the cattle in ways that were genuinely useful rather than just endearing. Sarah took after her mother, showing an interest in baking and business that delighted Amelia. In 1892, Amelia and Franklin welcomed their third child, a boy they named Thomas Franklin after both his uncle and his father. The birth was easier than the others, and Thomas was a cheerful, easy baby who rarely cried. David, now 7, took his role as big brother seriously, while Sarah, at 5, was delighted to finally have a sibling she could help take care of. The bakery expanded. Amelia's reputation had spread throughout the territory, and people came from as far as Tucson to buy her bread. She eventually opened a second location with Thomas as a partner, combining the bakery with his furniture business. It was a successful venture, and it meant Amelia could spend more time at home with the children while still maintaining her business. Franklin's ranch grew as well. He now ran 500 head of cattle and employed 3 permanent hands plus seasonal workers during Roundup. The Triple S Ranch had made him an offer to buy some of his land, but Franklin had turned it down. This was his place, his home, and he was not ready to give up any part of it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Amelia on a trip, just the two of them. Thomas and his new wife watched the children, giving Franklin and Amelia a week alone together. They rode out into the desert, camping under the stars just as they had done when they were courting. 10 years, Amelia said, lying in Franklin's arms and looking up at the night sky. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 10 years of my life, Franklin said. Even counting the hard parts, especially counting the hard parts because we got through them together. Do you still think about them? Amelia asked. She did not need to specify who she meant. Sarah and Emma, all the time, Franklin said honestly. But it is different now. It does not hurt the way it used to. I can think about them and smile, remember the good times without drowning in the grief. I think that is what healing looks like. Not forgetting, not moving on, but learning to carry the loss without it crushing you. I am glad, Amelia said. I never wanted you to forget them. I just wanted you to have room for us too. I have room for all of you, Franklin said, pulling her closer. My heart is bigger than I ever imagined it could be. Big enough for everyone I have loved and everyone I still love. You taught me that, Amelia. You taught me that love multiplies, it does not divide. They made love under the stars, slow and tender, reaffirming the bond they had forged over a decade of shared joys and sorrows. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their dreams for the future. More children, maybe, though 3 kept them plenty busy. Growing the businesses, watching their children grow up, eventually becoming grandparents. I want to grow old with you, Franklin said. I want to sit on our porch when we are 70 and watch the sunset and remember all the years we had together. I want our grandchildren to ask how we met, and I want to tell them the story about the broken wheel and how their grandmother fixed more than just her wagon that day. That is a good dream, Amelia said. Let us make it come true. They returned home refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. And what came next was mostly good. There were challenges, of course. A drought in '94 that tested everyone in the territory. A broken arm for David when he fell from a horse. A scary bout of influenza that swept through Mineral Point in '96 and had them all sick for weeks. But they weathered every storm, supporting each other, leaning on the strength of their partnership. In 1898, when Franklin was 48 and Amelia was 41, they welcomed an unexpected 4th child, a daughter they named Emma Rose. The choice of name was deliberate and meaningful, honoring both Franklin's first daughter and Amelia's mother. Young Emma was a surprise but a welcome one, and her older siblings doted on her. 4 children, Franklin said, holding baby Emma and shaking his head in wonder. 16 years ago, I thought I would never have a family again, and now look at us. We are blessed, Amelia agreed, though she was exhausted from the birth and the demands of a newborn at 41. Sometimes I can barely believe this is my life. As the new century approached, Franklin found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The Arizona Territory was growing, with talk of statehood in the air. Mineral Point had expanded from a small frontier town to a thriving community with schools and churches and businesses. The bakery Amelia had started was now a local institution, known throughout the region. But the most profound changes were personal. Franklin was no longer the broken man who had stopped to help a stranger with a wagon wheel. He was a husband, father, rancher, and respected member of the community. He had learned to carry his grief with grace, to honor his past while embracing his present, to love fully even knowing that loss was always a possibility. On New Year's Eve, 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Franklin and Amelia stood on their porch with their 4 children. David was now 17, tall and strong and planning to take over more of the ranch work. Sarah was 15, already helping manage the bakery's books and showing a head for business that surpassed even her mother's. Thomas was 8, curious and adventurous, always getting into some kind of mischief. And little Emma, just 2 years old, slept peacefully in Amelia's arms. New century, Franklin said, his arm around Amelia's shoulders. New opportunities, new challenges. Same family, Amelia said. Same love. Same partnership. That is what matters. They watched the stars wheel overhead, marking the passage of time. Franklin thought about all the years behind them and all the years still to come. He thought about Sarah and Emma in Colorado, about how loving them had prepared him to love again. He thought about that day in 1882, when he had heard a woman's frustrated cry and made the choice to stop. That choice had changed everything. It had led him here, to this porch, to this family, to this life he had built with Amelia. The broken pieces of his heart had healed, not because the old wounds had disappeared, but because new love had filled in the cracks with something stronger than what was there before. "Thank you," he said to Amelia, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. "For what?" she asked, though she knew. "For having a broken wheel," Franklin said with a smile, "for calling out in frustration, for trusting a stranger, for being patient while I learned how to love again, for everything." Amelia laughed, the sound warm and rich in the cool night air. "Thank you for stopping, for having the skills to help, for being brave enough to open your heart, for building this life with me." They stood there until the children grew restless and cold, then herded everyone inside. As Franklin banked the fire and locked the doors, securing their home against the night, he felt a profound sense of peace. This was what he had been searching for during all those years of drifting, even if he had not known it at the time. Home, family, love, purpose. All the things he thought he had lost forever, found again in the most unexpected way. A broken wagon wheel had brought him to Amelia, but it was their shared courage, their willingness to be vulnerable, their commitment to showing up for each other every single day that had built this life they shared. The years that followed were full and rich. Franklin and Amelia watched their children grow and thrive. David eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah married a businessman from Tucson and opened her own bakery there, carrying on the family tradition. Thomas became a veterinarian, one of the first in the territory, and traveled throughout Arizona treating animals. And little Emma, who grew up surrounded by love and stories of second chances, became a teacher who dedicated her life to helping others. Through it all, Franklin and Amelia remained each other's constant. They grew old together, just as Franklin had dreamed, sitting on their porch and watching sunsets and remembering. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1932, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a testament to the life they had built together. When Franklin was 82 years old, he fell ill. It was not sudden or unexpected, just the gradual wearing down that comes with age. Amelia, now 75 but still strong, stayed by his side constantly. Their children came to visit, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who filled the house with noise and life. On a warm spring evening, with the desert blooming outside his window and his family gathered around him, Franklin held Amelia's hand and smiled. "We did it," he said, his voice weak but content. "We built a good life, did we not? The best life," Amelia agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for stopping that day, Franklin. Thank you for every day since." "Thank you for fixing my broken heart," Franklin whispered. "I love you, Amelia. I will always love you." "I love you too," she said. "Go be with Sarah and Emma. Tell them about our children, our grandchildren. Tell them how full our life has been. Tell them I took good care of you." Franklin squeezed her hand one last time, then closed his eyes. He slipped away peacefully, surrounded by love, his last thoughts a mixture of the past and present, of all the people who had shaped his life and the legacy he was leaving behind. Amelia lived for 7 more years, continuing to run the bakery with the help of her children and grandchildren. She told the story of the broken wagon wheel to anyone who would listen, how a moment of frustration and a stranger's kindness had led to 50 years of love. She kept Franklin's memory alive through stories and recipes, and the warmth that filled her home whenever family gathered. When Amelia died in 1939 at the age of 82, Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. They remembered her bread and pastries, yes, but more than that they remembered her kindness, her strength, her unwavering belief that people could heal from even the worst wounds. She was buried next to Franklin, in a cemetery on the edge of Mineral Point with a view of the desert they both loved. The headstone was simple but meaningful. Amelia Jefferson Sawyer, 1857–1939. Beloved wife, mother, and baker, she fixed broken wheels and broken hearts. Their children ensured that the story of Franklin and Amelia became part of family legend, passed down through generations. The bakery continued for another 30 years before finally closing, but the recipes Amelia had brought from Philadelphia lived on in her descendants. The ranch Franklin had built was still in the family, now run by his great-great-grandchildren. And in Mineral Point, Arizona, there was a small plaque on what had once been Amelia's bakery. It read, "Here stood Jefferson's Bakery, established 1882 by Amelia Jefferson Sawyer, a place where bread was made, hearts were healed, and a community was nourished." A testament to the power of kindness, courage, and second chances. The story of the cowboy who stopped to help a woman with a broken wheel, and the woman who helped heal the broken pieces of his heart, lived on. It was told to children who needed to believe in love, to adults who had forgotten that healing was possible, to anyone who needed a reminder that life could surprise you in the best possible ways. Because in the end, that was what Franklin and Amelia's story was really about. Not just romance, though there was plenty of that. Not just overcoming grief, though that was part of it too. It was about the courage to remain open to possibility even after experiencing devastating loss. It was about the choice to help a stranger even when it would be easier to keep riding. It was about building something new without forgetting what came before. It was about partnership and patience, and the profound truth that broken things could be mended if you were willing to do the work. Franklin and Amelia's legacy was not just their children and grandchildren, though they would have been proud of the family they created. Their legacy was the example they set, the proof that it was possible to love again after loss, to start over after failure, to find joy even in the presence of sorrow. They showed that the heart was resilient, that love multiplied rather than divided, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. All because a wagon wheel broke on a dusty road in the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1882. All because a cowboy heard a woman's cry and made the choice to stop. All because two broken people found each other at exactly the right time and had the courage to believe in the possibility of healing. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they built together echoed forward through time, touching lives they would never know, inspiring people they would never meet. And somewhere in the vast desert they both loved, under the stars they had watched together for more than 50 years, their spirits found each other again, whole and healed and eternally grateful for the day a broken wheel brought them together and started them on the greatest adventure of their lives.